Hi, everybody. I'd like to go over chapter 3 together. And sorry about the lighting, but it's still dark out. It's like 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I didn't realize how bad the lighting is until I looked at my little webcam going here. Um, but I got to get some work done, so I'll just have to not worry about the lighting. Chapter 3 talked about groups, teams, and powerful meetings. We won't go into this too deeply, but this is another topic that's really important in supervision and in leadership. We are going to have a team building and problem solving class, so everything that's in this chapter is like times 10 in that class. But if we start off with the supervisor's problem on page 67, this is a really good example of when things break down and you're not working well with teams. This was the example of I think it was the Christiana Hospital of Newark, Delaware. Make sure you have your books, by the way. I've got my textbook here. So as we're going to kind of walk through this together. And in this case, the hospital, there was a lot of problems with people connecting on what was going wrong. In the end, it was saying they were rushing at the end of each shift to assemble carts of supplies. Things were often missing or defective, which to me in the medical community, kind of important that doesn't happen. But what they ended up doing is bringing together employees from different disciplines. That means cross-functional. In our world, in the business world, we have different functions or different departments. So a cross-functional team is just bringing different people in from different departments to work on a common problem. What's interesting is a lot of people don't think they need to be on these teams. Like, well, I'm not part of your sales problem. Yes, you are. There's a flow chart of every process that happens within a business. And part of process control is understanding what's happening upstream and downstream because you affect one another. It always amazes me the trouble we have with shift wars. And this little case study here also gets into that. If you look at the right-hand column, second paragraph, it said employees working different shifts tended to see themselves as being in conflict. So one shift would leave work for the next shift to complete. Sound familiar? Well, I've been a corporate trainer for over 14 years, and I go from company to company doing stuff like this, trying to teach people how not to have shift wars, how to work as a team. So for that to happen, you kind of got to have to understand the basics at least. What's a group or what's a team? They give you the definition of a group here: two or more people who interact with one another, are aware of one another, and think of themselves as a unit. That's a group. Doesn't make it a team. Okay? Very different. And as we move forward in the chapter, they look at why we join groups and then what are the different kinds of groups that we see in the workplace. There's a lot of different reasons why people join groups. Maybe you're just looking for some sort of, well, we look at it in a social sense. Some people just like to be with other people and work on something together. We have a common goal. There's always strength in numbers, that sort of thing. Or it's a way for us to achieve our personal objectives. Now, groups in the workplace, we have different kinds of groups: functional groups, task groups, formal groups, informal groups. You guys can read that. And a lot of this terminology is probably pretty familiar to you in your workplace, like a task group, a group that's just brought together to complete one task. But getting the group to work with you, because you are the supervisor, you're the leader of these groups, and of course you're also a participant within these groups because we have different roles to play. That's the tough part. So you need to look at that list on page 70 of, what you need to do to make this happen. How do you get people to work together and work for you and reach the goals within the group? Characteristics of the groups. There's basically, look at the bottom of page 72. There's a little diagram there, and you can see those 6 areas. So there's basically 6 characteristics of all groups. There's the different roles we play, the norms, the status, cohesiveness, size, and homogeneity. And then in the center, you see, if you could pull all of that together, then you'll have an effective group. Probably one of the toughest things that businesses face is getting their groups to be effective. We have groups that really flounder, and I'm sure all of you love those meetings that you go to, right? You go to the meeting, and when you're done, you say, well, okay, we better have another meeting about the meeting we just had. Well, that's when you're not having an effective team. So we have to understand the different roles that people play. like I said, this is a very abbreviated chapter because there are very distinct roles that this book doesn't necessarily get into. What they're referring to is, if you look on page 72 there, they talk about the scapegoat. Who's the scapegoat in that particular group or team? The class clown, so to speak, the know-it-all. There's a lot of different personality types. The roles themselves vary in the sense that you have to have participants and leaders and this, that, and the other thing. But what happens is we have a lot of conflict. If someone doesn't understand what their role is within the group, we have conflict. So if you have two people vying to be the leader of the group, you're going to have conflict. Okay. Now, the different norms of the group, that's just, usually it's dictated by corporate culture. But we also have different values and norms that we find for acceptable behavior. This needs to be laid out, like the ground rules. You guys, when you started the class, you looked at the ground rules that I shared with you that most of my students come up with when I ask them, what are your ground rules? You need to establish that. That's basically establishing what the norms are going to be, how we're going to work together. Status is pretty clear, or pretty self-explanatory. Cohesiveness. You need to look at that. It's on page 74, and make sure that you understand, how we bring a group together to be cohesive, like a family. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that. Some of our families are pretty dysfunctional. Maybe they need group or team training. Maybe that would help. But you look at the list they have here, by emphasizing to the group members their common characteristics of their goals. So when people get off track, for example, you as the leader, you need to say, okay, let's bring it back to why are we here, people? Now, if this means that you actually have to stop the meeting, go to your whiteboard, flip chart paper, whatever it is, then do it and say, okay, listen, we're off track. Why are we here? What is our mission? And if you can do that, you can often kind of start bringing people back into the fold. And you look at, by emphasizing areas in which the group has succeeded in achieving its goals. What is their history? Say, listen, I know this is tough. Whatever we're working on is really hard right now. But listen, we've managed it before. We'll manage it again. We need to rely on one another. Size of the group is very important. This book talks about, as few as 2 people can be a group, and, 15 or 16 members can get to know and communicate well with one another, blah, blah, blah. Well, we have to be really careful about the number of people we have in a group, because you can't have too many and you can't have too few, depending on what the project is. You like to have odd numbers. I don't know if the book mentions that, but if you have even numbers, what do you think happens? Yeah, let's take a vote. So odd numbers, we try to have, maybe 5 to 7 people is an ideal number. Homogeneity. Gosh, fancy pants word for we're all the same. Well, in today's workplace, we're looking at diversity, which is heterogeneous. And when we look at heterogeneous, we have to understand then we're dealing with people with different opinions, backgrounds, culture, all that good thing. So that kind of can get in the way too, because we have to develop a lot of understanding to make that work. And then if we can do all of that, we have effectiveness.